So my name is Brooklyn Stepro. I'm the grant administrator for the College of Sciences. I've been with the College of Sciences for about 2 years. Previously to being at UNLV, I did work for the Nevada System of Higher Education EPSCoR office. So I did some graduate programming there for federal grants. So I've been working in federal grants compliance loosely for about 5 years. Just a little bit about my background as a student. My undergraduate degree was in political science and history, and then my master's, I went to UNR actually, and I got a master's degree in public administration. Boo, UNR, but I'm incoming as a PhD student to UNLV in higher education leadership. So, it's kind of a full circle moment, but I've ended up working in research administration generally as a field. So you'll see my credential. I'm a certified research administrator. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about federal grant structure, kind of generally why you might want to care about it as a graduate student, and specifically some graduate funding opportunities, some grant funding opportunities available to you as a graduate student. Specifically, we'll talk about the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship Program. I do want to say some of the text on these slides is a little heavy. I will say working in grant compliance, there's a lot of information you have to follow, and that's just kind of how it is. So I wanted to have a presentation that I could share with you so that you could take home, look at it, and click at links. So I know it's not going to be super pleasant to look at while I'm talking through it, but I wanted something that is hopefully helpful that you could take home and maybe consider applying for this. So with that being said, I will go ahead and move ahead. So starting very generally, what is a grant? You might hear this a lot coming in as a graduate student at UNLV because research faculty and UNLV, if it hasn't been mentioned already, is an R1 institution. So our faculty here are obligated to get research grants. It's part of their tenure track process. They're going to complain and vent about it probably in teaching in their labs that they have to do their grant writing, blah, blah, blah. Also, if you're in their lab as a graduate assistant, you might be subject to some of their grant deliverables. So I would say the grant is like the lifeblood of the academic higher education system. There's a lot of federal funding that gets administered to higher education institutes. So essentially, it's a funding mechanism between two entities. We can have grants come from the federal government, from the state government, local entities such as like Clark County or Southern Nevada Water Authority have grant opportunities. There's also private and foundation grant opportunities. So that's just the name of the mechanism for funding. Grants are typically associated with having certain deliverables. So when you are grant funded, you are expected to have some project deliverables from your grant funder. So that's just kind of a typical process. There are mandatory and discretionary funds administered by the federal government. So mandatory grants are things like SNAP and Social Security, things that the federal government has to budget for. Discretionary grants are things like NASA and the National Science Foundation, NIH, things that are not necessarily mandatory for the infrastructure, but we certainly want these things funded. There are a lot of things happening right now in federal cycles with grant funding that these discretionary funds are significantly, I'm trying to think of it like a politically correct, it's not looking great right now for a lot of discretionary funding for federal agencies. So, that's also a concern in the context of you coming into higher education right now. That's something that faculty are really concerned about. This is something that people are concerned about is where they're going to get their funding from. So that's also something to be aware of and how this impacts you maybe in the environment as being a student. So I will go ahead and pop through. Generally, a grant, when I'm talking about a grant, you're talking about a project. It's a series of documents that here's our project that we're going to do. Here's all of our documents that we need to do it, which I'll touch on in a second. And so when I'm saying a grant proposal, I'm talking about the project description that a principal investigator or a faculty or you as a graduate student, you would submit a proposal, and that is your grant. So you're submitting a proposal, and so we have this general little life cycle of a grant. So you have your idea, so you're in that research development phase. You identify some funding sources that you can maybe get some dollars from. You start working on your proposal, you're in your preparation stage. You move to get internal approvals. That is something that also your faculty will complain about, is that they have to get internal approvals for everything they submit, because a grant, just like your graduate funding, is obligated through the university. And the university always wants to approve everything that you're going to obligate them to manage, basically. So they want to know about it beforehand if you're going to have incoming funding as a faculty. So you get your approvals. You go through the actual proposal submission portal. I guess I didn't talk about too much my role in the college. This is all of this kind of cycle up until the proposal submission is what I help faculty with in our college. So I will help them find opportunities. I'll help them put together their documents, get their internal reviews, put together their budgets, things like this. So then we submit it in a sponsor portal. It gets reviewed by the agency, by their review criteria, and by whatever the specific program is looking for in terms of funding. They'll have it reviewed, and then you get that fund. Hopefully you get an award. After that, the grant moves into post-award, which means that's the management and making sure you're spending your grant money correctly and compliantly, because grants are heavily associated with big compliance. If you're not spending your grant money correctly, the university is essentially at liability to have not receive federal dollars, all of these big things. You can have faculty get disbarred for not spending their grant money appropriately, like there is the risk of jail time. It really does depend. So grant compliance is a pretty big scope of importance at the university level. So that's just a little bit about how kind of the grant moves and how we get funded. So when you're looking for an opportunity for funding, the document that is asking you if you want to apply is called the grant solicitation. It has many different names. So depending on what kind of background you guys are in, and actually if I could get a raise of hands, how many of you are STEM and or social sciences based? 1, 2, 3. Okay, several of you. Okay. So you're going to have the opportunity, especially being in that STEM space. There are several funders I'll talk about in a second, that you can look at individual fellowships and graduate applications for. And they're going to have different names. So I just wanted to list some of them so you're kind of familiar. So some of the solicitations are called a NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity. They can be called the Request for Proposal, an RFP, a Request for Application, an RFA, a Parent Announcement, that's for the NIH, is a PA, a Call for Application, CFA, Funding Opportunity Announcement, FOA. They're all the same thing. I don't know why we can't have consistent language all of the time, but it is the same thing. This is a call for an application for you to submit a project idea, for you to submit a grant proposal. So some common elements of a general solicitation, which I'm going to be moving through some parts of that NSF GRFP solicitation, but we'll see the funding program overview. So it'll talk about the priority areas an area wants to fund. It'll talk about the submission parameters and restrictions, including the eligibility of what kind of applicants can or cannot apply. It will talk about the required content of your submission, so page limits, how many pages you have on different types of documents. The review criteria, what review are your reviewers looking at? What questions are they considering when they're looking to see if your merit of your proposal should be funded? You'll talk about any certifications you might need, internal approval, stuff like this, award parameters for when you actually receive the award, and some appendices usually as well. So those are kind of the general elements of solicitation. And I wanted to list off, so I feel like sometimes you're like, oh, a grant, and it seems like this really vague concept to people until you're like, I don't know, in my job and looking at these documents. This is what a grant is. So there's an abstract and a summary. It's usually like a paragraph. This is what gets publicly available when a research faculty receives an award from an institution. This is what will be publicly available online, is usually that project abstract. And then you have a project plan. The project description is what it's called for the NSF, or it's called a research strategy for the NIH. But that's going to be the meat of what the actual project is. So that's usually I will say for the NSF, a research grant is 15 pages for a project description. And then your bio sketch, so that's like a CV essentially, or your resume. They are in particular formats that we have the faculty do through Science CV, but regardless, essentially you usually are submitting something about yourself to verify that you can do the work that you're proposing in your project. Then you would have a budget and a justification. What money do you need? What do you need it for materials and supplies? Do you need your money to fund a student to help you do your research? And why are you requesting this money that you're requesting? There's also going to be a facilities and resources document. So these are typically documents that you want to basically prove that you can do the research you're proposing. If you're a biomedical engineer and you are proposing to develop lipid nanoparticles, do you have the facilities and equipment on hand to actually do that? If you don't demonstrate that you do, you can get your proposal off of the table for review. So these are the documents that your faculty are putting together to support the projects that they're proposing. And then additionally, there's usually some supplementary documents and some other support documents like a data management plan and a bunch of things I'm not going to tell you about, but those are usually 1 or 2 pagers, some additional plans to make sure you're managing your data appropriately on the project, et cetera. In total, I will say usually a grant package ranges, just out of curiosity, like between 50 and like 120 pages when you have all of this put together at the end of the day. And then I won't go into this super explicitly, but just for your awareness, when you're on if you're in any lab or you're on assistantship or even in a teaching assistantship, spending on your grant has to be compliant to the grant. So that's kind of one of my take homes today as like a grants professional, is that sometimes the PIs will be like, the principal investigators or your faculty will be like, I want to spend money on a coffee maker because that helps my lab in productivity, but like that's not allowable on a grant. So like you can't do that. And as a graduate student, you will be, a lot of you probably, even though I know you're not supposed to do this, but like we all know it happens, you might be using someone's P card to buy things. You might be using someone's transaction card to buy things in your lab, and you want to have an idea of, just does this go to the project that we're really working on? So this is on the post-award side of the grant life cycle. We're looking at allowability, allocability, reasonableness, and consistency of the spending costs on a grant. So this is just something to be mindful of, that faculty do have to follow these rules when they're spending their grant money. So that includes when you are funded on a grant. Now, federal grants and why we care about it in institutions of higher education. What's the impact? Well, student financial aid, which is through the Department of Education, so your FAFSA, is the largest federal category of grant funding, not discretionary. It's not something you compete for and apply for. This is a mandatory program, but regardless, it's the largest federal grant funding that comes to universities. So all financial aid is through the federal government, as well as Pell Grants that go to exceptionally financial need undergraduate students, which I don't do too much usually with undergraduate students. And then our second largest area is going to be that research and development. So what I help faculty primarily work on, I'm not in the financial aid office, but this is just for your awareness, like this is the impact. Financial aid is huge in federal grant funding. And then we have the research and development space, which is primarily what I work in with faculty and with students, is those grants that are to individual PIs. Might be, like a couple $1 million, might be less, but these are the grants that are going to the faculty that you're working with to fund your assistantships, to fund undergraduate students in labs. All of these, like any research that is happening on campus is grant funded. Like I would guarantee almost that all of it is grant funded. So anything, equipment, facility expansions, oftentimes like these are grant funds that are coming into the institution and supporting students to work in research spaces. So this is a huge area, and as I've already said, but just things for you to be aware of in the grant funding space is that, as your PIs are grant funded, you are subject to those grant deliverables. So that's primarily And if they're not saying that, well, that's not true because they are obligated to their grant deliverables. So that's just how it is. And then continued, kind of lastly, this other area of federal grant support tends to be in institutional support programs for more niche groups and designations, such as UNLV. We are a Hispanic serving institution and a minority serving institution. So the federal government does offer specific programs that are available for universities to have additional supports on campus. So that can be programming and student infrastructure. But again, just demonstrating the extreme impact that federal funding has in being a student on campus. So federal funds can significantly impact universities by enabling research, supporting specialized programs, and enhancing resilience during times of crisis. So just a little point out, so the quick ones on the top of my head that are really awesome projects of some grants in action on campus. UNLV Urban Forestry is a project led by Dr. Allison Sloat in the College of Sciences. They receive funding from USDA, or I believe, or USGS, one of the Department of Interior sub-departments there. But essentially, they got funded to plant all of these trees locally in urban areas to help with urban heat effect. They have several undergraduate students and graduate students that are funded to do this work across the community. Obviously, that's hopefully in the long term. These are small trees now, but hopefully will be lasting and can have longer community impact. So important for the institution, important for the community. Additionally, there's UNLV wastewater surveillance programs. Dr. Edwin O. In COVID and during the pandemic, he was super big and helpful in the community in identifying COVID-19 in the wastewater facilities. So they were helpful in seeing what areas of the valley were more impacted during the pandemic. So that is another grant-funded project that was through the National Institutes of Health. Again, all of these funds pay for students to be doing this work as well. So these grants all pay for the labs and for the undergraduate students. I wanted to also shout out Dr. Blanca Rincon. She has the HSI Resource Hub. It was a super competitive NSF grant to get funded to be a resource hub for other Hispanic serving institutions. So UNLV in the Hispanic serving institution kind of like higher education policy space is really active and has these large projects happening from our really talented faculty who are getting grants and doing these really awesome things on campus. She doesn't have a website yet, but Dr. Carrie Tyler in Geosciences, she just received also a grant that is going to tie into when I start talking about the NSF GRFP. She just got like $3 million basically to fund graduate students in geosciences that get an honorable mention on this GRFP I'm going to talk about. So in this GRFP, well, I'll just go to it now. So the National Science Foundation, aside from the National Institutes of Health, so outside of biomedical and medical research, the National Science Foundation funds the largest amount of science grants and projects in the U.S. Medical funding, that would be the National Institutes of Health. So the NSF GRFP, it's a competitive award. It funds for a graduate research assistantship on a research project for 3 years, and you can spend that 3 years within a 5-year period, meaning maybe if you had your first 2 years and you need to take a year off for some reason, you could have that third year within that 5-year kind of parameter. But the point is 3 years of funding of research assistantship funding. And that is for you to propose a project to them. I'm going to talk about all the eligibility coming in here in a second. But even if you don't receive an award for the NSF GRFP, you could be listed secondarily as an honorable mention, and that has now opened up categories of you to have maybe potential fundings. For example, at UNLV, it's the geoscience program that she received internally, but there would be, not that I'm trying to send you to anywhere else, but there are other programs that are offering essentially funding if you hit that honorable mention category as well. So even if you didn't get the award for the NSF GRFP, it could still be of value to try to shoot your shot, see if you get that honorable mention, and maybe can have some other pools of funding available to you. So I'm going to, before I jump in to the solicitation specifics, how am I doing on time? Am I, okay, sorry. I know it's a lot of content. I am gonna take questions at the end. Before I jump in, I guess, to the actual NSF GRFP, are there any questions now? Okay, cool, okay, I will just keep going then. So here's some funding for you to have on your mind as available to graduate students. So typically most of these are going to be, and just because this is the space I'm in, for STEM space as well as social science. And I will say the NIH, the individual fellowships also go into the health sciences as well. So there are opportunities in almost anywhere that you can find, honestly, for graduate fellowship and student funding. So like I've been mentioning, the NSF GRFP is a really large one I'm gonna go over. The US Department of Energy, or the DOE's, their Office of Science, they also have a graduate student research program that is also, I believe it's 2 or 3 years of GA funding. And when I'm gonna talk about the GRFP, however, I will say a lot of the application elements of the GRFP carry over to some of these other fellowships as well. So some of the key takeaways and tips for writing and pulling it together will hopefully be applicable and helpful for you in going for other fellowship opportunities as well. And then the NIH individual fellowships, those would be called F awards. Researchers like to get R awards for research awards from the NIH, but there are fellowship or F awards from the NIH. All of these are linked, so I hope to share these slides, so you can take a look at these opportunities yourself. And then I did link to UNLV's graduate fellowships and scholarships that they have available. There are some internal funds for grants that you can apply for. And then additionally, I really did want to point out this last resource for UNLV Pivot. That is an internal website that you can create an account with your ACE ID, and you can search for funding opportunities in there. So I do know that some faculty have had graduate assistants get on it to help them look for funding, and you can also look for it for yourself as well. I didn't type up here, I should have, but NASA also has fellowship awards as well. So most of the large major agencies do have graduate fellowship awards that are available to you. If truly Google and AI is now, if you have your subject area and type graduate fellowship federal and just see what comes up, I'm sure you'll find some opportunities. All right, so now jumping into the NSF GRFP. I'm just gonna read off this synopsis for you. This is from the NSF. And actually, sorry, let me take a step back. Before I get into this, I should mention that the National Science Foundation has recently removed this call from their website, saying that it's pending to be updated. So typically the deadline is at the end of October. I will say, with how things have been looking, there have been things just closed. And I doubt that this is the case for this program, although it could be. Perhaps they're not taking applications this year, and they might start again next fall. And this is just due to the mess of what's happening federally right now. So I'm going through the previous solicitations guidelines that have been in place for a decade. So there might be some changes the next time they announce the call to this. Hopefully not too much. If I had to take a guess, it would be a change to the broader impacts review criteria. But that's just me saying that. I have no idea. So really, this is not an active opportunity right now online, even though it's historically always active and due dates are in the end of October. So I still want to go through it because it's an amazing opportunity that shouldn't be disappearing, hopefully for real anytime soon. So the synopsis of the program is to help ensure the quality, vitality, and strength of the scientific and engineering workforce in the United States. The program recognizes and supports outstanding graduate students who are pursuing full-time research-based master's and doctoral degrees in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or in STEM education. I will say they have a variety in social sciences as well. I was actually just looking at funded GRFP awards. The GRFP provides 3 years of support over a 5-year fellowship period for graduate education, or for the graduate education of individuals who have demonstrated the potential for significant research achievements. So they want a full variety of projects. There's no project, I think, that is unfeasible really to be applying to this program. So here's some eligibility considerations. Essentially, here's the years that you can apply. this is not applicable for you, but I'm going to read it. You have to be an undergraduate senior or a bachelor's degree holder who's not enrolled in anything but is interested in continuing into a graduate degree, or you are a first-year graduate student or a second-year graduate student in your first semester, because there is one criteria that you cannot have more than a full year of graduate degree or credits, sorry, a full year of degree credits completed, meaning you can be a second year student, but you need to be in your first semester before you've actually completed the semester out. So this is applicable for first year graduate students and the second year, again, first semester graduate students. This is restricted to U.S. citizenship and permanent residency eligibility. And then additionally, these are probably not applicable to most folks, but you have to have never received a previous graduate research fellowship. You can't work for the NSF. You can't have previously applied while enrolled in a graduate degree program. So if you're fresh in as a first-year graduate student to a new program, then you should be fine to meet the bill for most of this criteria. If there are accessibility considerations for your application, meaning if you need a screen reader and you have to use the online system, which I'm about to touch on, but you have to have your letters of recommendation also use the online system. So if you are aware of any letters of rec or yourself who might need some accessibility changes, just email. They have an email that, I'm sorry, the Zoom thing is like right in the way, so I can't read it off right now, but there is an email for essentially just their web service to help you with accessibility in the application. So the eligible areas of study for this program are chemistry, computer and information sciences and engineering, geosciences, life sciences, materials research, mathematical sciences, physics and astronomy, psychology, social behavioral and economic sciences, STEM education and learning research. And again, that social behavioral and economic sciences, like I was looking at some of the awards, it's very broad. So you have in that application portal, you can select your area of study, and it can be an other, please specify. So it's broad. I wouldn't consider this to like limit you in any way. If you're unsure, you can always reach out to me and we can check the solicitation, and I'll be happy to reach out to the program officer to manage and see if the student seems to be eligible. But really there are some very broad scope of projects that are funded under this program. So these are the immediately ineligible programs. If you're in a professional degree program such as an MBA, PharmD, dental school, that it makes you ineligible for this. However, most of these programs would be eligible for the NIH fellowship applications. So that's something to consider. And then, so clinical practice, counseling, social work, all of those are also taken out as ineligible areas in this program opportunity.